Talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, but to the point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About on GB News with me, Alex Phillips, where we get stuck into the big issues that we need to look at in depth. Nothing is off the table and no one's going to be cancelled for saying what they think. Keeping me company today is Gina Miller, leader of the True and Fair Party, and here's what we're discussing on the show. Is a culture of sleaze in Parliament down to late nights and Commons bars? That's the Defence Secretary's view as a Tory MP is investigated for watching porn in the chamber, and a Labour frontbencher is accused of lewd remarks. We'll have the latest from Westminster. The 500,000 backlog at the Passport Office. Who's to blame and how will it be resolved so the Great British Getaway can go ahead this summer? Plus, a new EU army. It's on the horizon as Europe eyes up a united defence policy. But what would that mean for us? That's what we're talking about for the next hour. What do you need to get off your chest? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet the show at gbnews. But first, it's time for the GB News headlines.
Thanks, Alex. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 2. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB Newsroom. A mother addicted to heroin has been jailed for 20 years for the gross negligence manslaughter of her 7-year-old son. Hakeem Hussein, who was asthmatic, died after Laura Heath used his inhalers to smoke crack cocaine. His body was found in a garden in Birmingham in 2017, where he died alone after suffering an asthma attack. She admitted child cruelty. A man charged with the murders of 4 people in southeast London has been remanded in custody. Joshua Jacques is accused of killing 3 generations of the same family. 64-year-old NHS worker Dollet Hill and her 59-year-old partner Denton Burke were stabbed in their home in Bermondsey on Monday. Her daughter Tanisha Euphoria Kufo and granddaughter Samantha Drummonds were also attacked. Conservative MP Jamie Wallis has been charged with failing to stop after a car crash in November last year. South Wales Police says he's also been charged with failing to report a collision, driving without due care and attention, and leaving a vehicle in a dangerous position. Wallis recently came out as trans and revealed in a personal statement he was raped and blackmailed. The MP is due to appear before Cardiff Magistrates Court next month. Labour MP Liam Byrne has apologised after a disciplinary panel upheld allegations that he bullied a member of staff. It found that the former minister abused his position by ostracising his victim for several months. Labour's supporting the panel's recommendation that he be suspended from the Commons for 2 days. Sir Keir Starmer says the Conservative Party should take action now against the MP accused of watching porn in the Commons. The Labour leader's call follows the launch of an investigation by the government chief whip. Allegations about the unnamed member were first raised during a meeting of Tory MPs. Sir Keir says members of Parliament have a responsibility to improve the working environment.
We've all got a responsibility to change the culture in Parliament. If you look at the awful things that were said about Angela Rayner, the rank sexism and misogyny, and it's not just Angela Rayner, there are too many examples, too many women have experienced that same sexism and misogyny. We've all got a responsibility. That requires culture change, and culture change has to be led from and modelled from the top.
The government says post-Brexit import controls on European Union goods won't be imposed this year to ease the cost of living crisis. Traders are expected to save at least £1 billion with the new approach. The government will publish a new plan for next year. That as Boris Johnson met with Swiss President Ignacio Cassis today to work on a new trade deal. The Queen also hosted a face-to-face meeting with the Swiss President, posing with Mr Cassis and his wife Paula. She was photographed without her walking stick. The monarch returned to Windsor Castle after spending last week at her Sandringham estate. The UN Secretary-General is visiting the Ukrainian town of Bucha in the Kiev region. Russian forces are accused of killing thousands of civilians in the area before withdrawing to focus on the eastern border. Antonio Guterres is expected to meet the President Volodymyr Zelensky later today. And 27 people have been arrested after climate activists blocked 2 motorway service stations on the M25. The Just Stop Oil protesters prevented motorists from entering forecourts at Cobham and Clackett Lane services. They also smashed petrol pumps and glued themselves to the top of a lorry. Police say protesters have now been removed from Cobham, but demonstrations are ongoing at Clackett Lane. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though it's back to Alex, and we need to talk about.
As Rishi Sunak tries to figure out how to manage the cost of living crisis, ruminating on whether to whack a tax on the big energy companies, there is evidently a lot of maths to debate. Clearly, some in his party got the wrong message and instead decided to do some personal research into the sort of websites Nadine Dorries should be regulating. First of all, anyone watching porn at work should probably be sacked. But sitting and scrolling through X-rated material in front of colleagues in the chamber, and I don't mean one's bedroom, is just plain gross. The MP should be named and shamed. It's the latest in a series of Westminster peccadillos following crass accusations that Angela Rayner flashes more than her parliamentary pass and revelations that a member of Labour's shadow cabinet made lewd comments that a colleague was a secret weapon because men wanted to sleep with her. If you're thinking Westminster sounds like a 1970s stand-up routine, you're not far off. Throw in some coke, some bonking on desks and a press pack dousing young aides in copious amounts of alcohol, and you realise that this ain't no ordinary office. As Ben Wallace says, Parliament has a poisonous culture of late-night boozing and behavioural problems, the likes of which would not be tolerated anywhere else. It's high time showbiz for ugly people had its very own Me Too moment. Well, let's cross live to Westminster and speak to GB News political correspondent Tom Harwood. Tom, I mean, what is there to say on this revelation or allegations that a Conservative MP was looking at porn in Parliament, in the debating chamber?
Yes, it's the most remarkable story and one that's been unfurling over the last 48 hours. Now, on Tuesday evening, a group of Conservative MPs were having a meeting. Ostensibly, the message of that meeting was how to keep women in politics. The number of female Conservative MPs has grown by a huge degree over the last 10 or 20 years, but the rate at which women MPs leave Parliament is much higher than the rate at which male MPs leave Parliament. So this was a meeting about trying to find ways to keep women there, and it sort of merged into something that just became a session talking about the culture of the building behind me. And then one female Conservative MP stood up to say that actually she had seen a male Conservative MP watching pornography on his phone or looking at pornography on his phone within the chamber. Someone else at the same meeting corroborated that story too. Well, this became a story that was then raised at Prime Minister's questions yesterday. The Prime Minister said, well, this is clearly a breach of the ministerial code. If that were to have happened, then if that person were a minister, they would need to resign. There's been some confusion as to whether the individual is on the front bench or not, could potentially be a lower ranking non-minister, a sort of PPS, or indeed a backbencher. We're not sure, although the guidance has seemed to be it's not expected to be a member of the cabinet. But clearly a lot of ambiguity here, not being named in public. Some names have been flying around the building behind me in rumour form, but I think it would be inappropriate to name any of those names that have just simply had rumours attached to them now. What has happened is this case went first to the Conservative Chief Whip, Chris Heaton-Harris, who then decided it would be more appropriate for the independent parliamentary authorities to assess what has gone on and carry out their investigation. So it's out of the hands of the Conservative whips and into the hands of the parliamentary authorities.
I mean, this is, of course, hot on the heels as well as that Mail on Sunday article where, again, an undisclosed Tory MP was suggesting that Angela Rayner deliberately crossed and uncrossed her legs in comments that people are regarding, or many are regarding, as misogynistic. And now we learn as well that a Labour frontbencher has been making equally lewd remarks. Tell us more.
Yes, a Labour frontbencher allegedly making some pretty crass remarks with regard to a woman who he was saying about the woman that she attracts all the men because she's sexy in some sort of way and attracts all the women because she's friendly. Really inappropriate comments for any workplace, but that is what was said. And of course that Mail on Sunday piece that has rolled on and on had this unedifying display of the Speaker standing up wanting to call the editor of the Mail on Sunday into Parliament, the editor refusing on the grounds of press freedom. And actually, to be fair, a number of those in the lobby sort of agreed that that might have been a little bit of an overreach from the Speaker. After all, the Mail was reporting what it had heard from a MP, and it has since said there have been a number of other MPs who have said that story, and the Mail has in recent days published audio from a podcast back a few months ago that the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, Angela Rayner, made with the comedian Matt Ford. She was being interviewed and referenced the story then. This has been a rumour that had been flying around Westminster. She was saying it in a sort of jokey way that, you know, I'm supposed to have been showing my legs to the Prime Minister to distract him. She obviously hadn't originated the rumour at that point, but was clearly aware of it. It was clearly a rumour that was going around Parliament. Now, is it the fault of the Mail on Sunday for printing that rumour? Well, they're reporting what is being said in the building behind me. It's wise to not make a value judgment on that, and clearly it is something that is deeply sexist and inappropriate. But is it the place of journalists to report what they hear? Well, that is open to interpretation, and people felt that the Speaker may well have gone too far in that case.
We also learned, didn't we, that 55 MPs are currently under investigation by the parliamentary watchdog for sexual harassment. That's about 1 in 7, a staggering number. And if it's not sexual sleaze, it's bullying. I understand that former Labour Minister Liam Byrne has come under fire for accusations of bullying.
That's right. Liam Byrne, probably most famous for writing that note, "We've got no money," at the end of the Labour Party's 13 years of government from 97 to 2010. Well, he has been found to, a couple of years ago, have ostracised an employee after a bust-up in his parliamentary office. That particular individual who was working for him took that complaint further, and it's taken a number of years, but it has been resolved in that Liam Byrne has been found to have done wrong, has been found to have bullied his employee, and as a result has had a suspension from the House for 2 days.
Thank you so much for getting us updated with the latest. That's Tom Harwood, our political correspondent. Well, let's talk now to former Labour Party advisor Scarlett Maguire. Scarlett, I mean, when is this going to end? It just sounds like the most dreadful place on earth to work, doesn't it? But this is a cross-party issue, isn't it? It's not just the Tories who are getting up to all sorts of no good.
No, it's certainly a cross-party issue. And actually, it's really about entitlement. It's about MPs who feel that they're entitled to behave how they like. They don't think about what they do. They don't think about what they say. I mean, one has to say some of them are pretty stupid. I mean, whoever sits and watches porn on their phone next to another woman MP seems very, very stupid. But then, you know, I mean, another Tory MP sent dick pictures to two of his constituents. You just wonder what's going on. But it is about that thing about it is up until now, they've had nobody to answer to. They are treated like princes and princesses in Parliament. They have special things for them, and I just think that they are so important that they can behave as they want.
I mean, what's the answer? Is it things like closing the bars in Parliament? It's not that, you know, many offices up and down the country have various places where you can go and get boozed up. Would that be a start, do you think?
I think the toxic culture does not come from the booze. The booze encourages it. There's no question that once you get drunk, but actually, you know, sitting in the chamber watching porn has got nothing to do with drinking, right? An awful lot of there's much more going on than anybody hears about, partly because a lot of people do not talk publicly about the harassment that they have because of the loyalty that they have to their party or to the person who employs them. It's very, very difficult. I mean, up until now, the only person you could complain to was somebody else in your office that, I mean, might be your boss's wife, right? So it has been really difficult. It might change. I mean, I think the drinking culture certainly doesn't help, but to blame it on that instead of the incredible entitlement of MPs is, I think, completely wrong.
I mean, what is it specifically about politics? I mean, people say that power is an aphrodisiac, and from the interactions I've had with politics, I often think that, especially when it comes to youth movements, quite troubled souls seem to be drawn to the world of politics, and it's an environment in which MPs are pretty much considered rock stars.
Well, they certainly consider themselves rock stars, whatever we, the public. I mean, it is about that. It is about that you get somebody who's a leader, who's a charismatic leader. Not that all MPs have charisma, one has to say, but you have a charismatic leader and they are used to getting their way with people. They're used to persuading people to do what they want. Any charismatic leader, whether they're in politics, I mean, the same goes, I mean, I've seen it in medicine, I've seen it elsewhere, that they actually think they've got a ticket to do what they want, and they do.
Scarlett Maguire, fantastic talking to you today. That's Scarlett Maguire, a former Labour Special Advisor. Well, my special guest today is Gina Miller. She was a prominent campaigner against Brexit and is the leader of the True and Fair Party, which is pushing for enforceable rules on MPs' political conduct. Gina, delighted to have you here today. I mean, it's a very different era. Politics has always been associated with sleaze and scandal and the goings-on in the corridors of power. But it strikes me that we live in a very different era where, once upon a time, the Prime Minister used to be the bastion of family values, and now at the helm of our government, we've got a man who's never publicly stated how many children he has.
There is so much. We could carry on talking about this all day, I think. I thought I couldn't be shocked in what goes on in the corridors of power, because it's the old saying, you know, power corrupts and it corrupts completely. And I do think that's true. I agree with lots of what Scarlett has said, but for the fact that actually charismatic leaders are in all walks of life. And in business and in charities, wherever you are, there are rules. And you couldn't behave like you're behaving in Parliament because there are rules, there are conduct procedures, there are contracts of employment, you can sack someone. None of that redress happens in Parliament. And I think that's one of the problems. We have such weak checks and balances when it comes to terrible behaviour that goes with those who feel entitled and, as Scarlett said, feel as though they're princes and princesses, that where is the redress when they behave like this? It's, oh, you get suspended for 2 days. So what? You know, it is ridiculous. We have to have legislation which actually improves the culture, because the culture is in the gutter. I mean, as you said, 56 MPs cross-party being, you know, investigated for sexual misconduct is a shocking example to our country. What does that say to young people? What does that say to other countries? I mean, we are hanging our heads in shame. because of our politicians, not because of us as general members of the public, but because of the way our leaders are behaving. And I think things have got to change drastically. And it's not just at the top. I agree with you that we haven't got a great exemplar of family values, but it's more than that, because it's not just him. It's actually across the parties, across different levels, ministers, you know, as you said, there's front ministers sitting on the front bench, there's PPSs, there's backbenchers. This is the whole lot of them who don't seem to have any way of controlling their own urges, their own desires, and their own behaviour. It's got to stop.
I mean, you used to work in a city which infamously always had this sort of Wolf of Wall Street style culture of boozy long lunches. And my understanding today is actually the world of finance has cleaned up its act a lot and banking's become quite a boring place to work. So what is the magic recipe that Parliament now needs to follow?
I mean, we actually had to. The pressure came from consumers and it came from wanting to attract good people in the business. And if you apply that to politics, you know, you've got to clean up your act, because if you want better people in politics, you're going to have to create a better culture. And also, us, the voters, have got to be more vocal. We've got to demand it. And that will happen at the ballot box. But actually, it's got to happen every day, which is why I've said to the True and Fair Party, what we need to do is we need to bring in legislation. We have to bring in rules that will create a cultural change, because they're not going to do it themselves. When they're there, they seem to think that it is their right to behave how they wish.
Gina, I love the cut of your jib. Thank you ever so much. I want to know your views on these scandals. Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet us at gbnews. Do you think that Parliament sounds like a cesspit? Is it time that Westminster follow the sort of rules and regulations that most offices up and down the country have to follow? Let me know. You're with GB News on TV and radio. After the break, the passport shambles as civil servants struggle with a 500,000 long backlog. Well, what's happening next? First of all, though, it's time for a check on the weather forecast.
Hello, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update. Another dry day for the vast majority today. Not particularly sunny. There is quite a lot of cloud around, but many places bright and fine. The thickest cloud across eastern England and northern Scotland. High pressure is sitting right across the UK and will bring the vast majority another dry day. But the cloud is thick in places, particularly over northern Scotland, where we could just have one or two showers. And it's quite a grey day for much of Yorkshire, down into the Midlands and East Anglia. It'll take a while before that cloud starts to break up. Elsewhere, we've got quite a lot of cloud, but there's still some brightness coming through, some hazy sunshine for Wales, southern parts of England, the far north of England, southern Scotland. And if we do get some brightness, temperatures 15, 16, maybe 17, possibly 18 across the south, but feeling quite cold where that cloud persists over eastern England and northern Scotland. Still one or two showers to come across the Northern Isles through this evening, but they should tend to fade. And for most, it's going to be a dry night, a very small chance of a shower across the southeast. Clear skies for many, and temperatures will again be dropping well down into single figures. In rural spots over Northern Ireland, Northern England, again, we could be a couple of degrees below freezing to start Friday. So another chilly start and another fairly cloudy day over parts of eastern England, Lincolnshire and East Anglia in particular, but also across the southeast. Elsewhere, again, many places looking dry and bright with perhaps a bit more sunshine, but the cloud thickening up at times during the day over eastern Scotland, and we could just see one or two showers here during tomorrow. Again, temperatures responding to a bit of sunshine up to the mid or even high teens in places, feeling fairly pleasant after a chilly start. But again, parts of the east coast, especially where it stays glum, will be on the fresh side, to say the least. And temperature dropping away on Friday night, leading to a chilly start to the weekend. Bank holiday weekend as well. There will be some rain working into Scotland and Northern Ireland on Saturday. A few more showers around on Sunday, and generally staying on the cool side.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes & Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes & Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m, as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. Backlog is now the buzzword of the post-pandemic era. Whether you need surgery, a driver's licence or a new passport, the likelihood is you're going to have to wait. But for people who have booked holidays and are trying to get their passports sorted a sensible few months out in advance, the vain belief that Britain is still a first world country, well, the delays are now so great, the likelihood is they won't get their documents in time. It's the latest in Home Office uselessness, following revelations that the Rwanda plan is predictably in tatters after it transpired only 2% of migrants would qualify for deportation, while airlines refused to be part of it. Patel may as well stick Igor from Albania on Truss's private jet at this point. The Home Office is becoming notoriously crap at everything. From the Windrush scandal to Afghan migrants languishing in hotels and desperate Ukrainians marooned waiting for visas while terrorists are running prisons. It's hardly the first time the department has been lambasted. Last year, its top civil servants resigned, threatening to sue the government and getting a 300 grand settlement amidst claims Priti Patel was bullying staff. It sounds to me like a department in disarray. Well, Downing Street's Chief of Staff, Steve Barclay, is to meet with the Passport Office leaders over the backlog of 500,000 British passports. On our Home and Security editor, Mark White's been finding out more about the ongoing issues.
After 2 years of effective COVID lockdown, unsurprisingly, millions of Brits are desperate to get away this summer. But the dream of foreign beaches is fast becoming a nightmare for increasing numbers of people who are being caught up in delays at the passport agency. Huge demand post-COVID has tripled the normal processing time for people like Sophie Power, who've experienced long delays in receiving their passport and accompanying documents. In her case, putting a new job overseas at risk.
It's been incredibly stressful, especially when you're on the phone to people that just don't have any answers. I was told weeks ago that Liverpool had my passport on the 28th of March. Well, we're now nearing mid to end April and there was no other information, which was when they discovered that the likelihood was actually that the document was lost.
In a normal year, 7 million passport applications would be received. This year, the Passport Agency expects to receive 9.5 million applications. Before the pandemic, processing a standard passport application would take around 3 weeks. Now the Passport Agency is warning people to be prepared for possible delays of up to 10 weeks. Much of the delay is being blamed on the pandemic, which saw 5 million passports expire over the 2 years of lockdown. Many of those owning out-of-date passports delayed renewing them and are only now going through that process. But the Passport Agency is still being accused of failing to prepare properly for a foreseeable surge in demand.
We've had one constituent who, if she doesn't get a passport in the next week or so, is going to miss out on a job she's secured in America. We've had another who missed, young girl who missed half of her holiday in the end, just managed to make her uncle's wedding, but looked set to miss out there. We've had a third constituent just yesterday who's had to cancel their holiday because they've been waiting 13 weeks for the passports. And from the perspective of the government, they've just got to sort this shambles out as a matter of urgency.
Downing Street's Chief of Staff is meeting face-to-face with Passport Agency management today. The last thing the Prime Minister wants is a growing backlash from an angry public unable to get their passports in time. In the meantime, the Passport Agency is urging applicants to use digital photo booths, where they receive an automated digital code to help ensure their online applications are dealt with more speedily. Mark White, GB News.
Well, we can cross live now to GB News reporter Rosie White, who is at the Victoria Passport Office in London. Rosie, what's the latest?
Alex, I've spent the day speaking to people who have just tried on the off chance to turn up to see is there anything they can do to secure a passport, because they've looked online and thought 10 weeks, I can't wait for that. Then they've tried to book themselves into the 1 week fast track system. That requires an appointment, and that's what right now is hard to get your hands on. Here's what a couple of people told me earlier. Right, Liam, explain to me, why do you need a new passport?
I'm going to Cancun in 45 days, so I need a fast-track service. I can't get no fast-track appointments. There's available for a 10-week wait one, but in the office they're saying it's going to be longer wait, which is a lie on the system. So I'm stuck. I don't know what to do with myself. There might be an appointment in Glasgow to go to, but then again, let's see if I can get an appointment at the time. So I'm stuck.
Getting a new passport because this one is damaged, and every time you go on the website to try and apply for a new one, then what happens?
It says system's busy, nothing's coming up.
So what's your option now for your holiday?
Well, just wake up every morning, try to get an appointment, see what happens, hope for the best.
Scott, explain to me, you've had a long journey today, why have you come here?
We've come to get a passport for our grandson. But we couldn't get an appointment anywhere near back home in Wales, so we had to leave at 7 this morning. Did 181 miles to come here just to get to the appointment.
And why is it that you need a new passport?
We're off to Gran Canaria in 5 weeks, and we simply couldn't get the normal passport because it wouldn't have come in time. So that's about it.
How stressful has it been?
Well, it's cost me a day off work, and it's been just a nightmare. But hopefully we get it sorted today.
Rosie, I mean, lots of people there who look...
In some cases, people need a passport for something... Sorry, Alex.
No, sorry,
The
Rosie.
people I spoke to, we just heard from there. That's about their... Don't worry, and there's a bit of a delay as well, so it's tricky to hear you. But those people that I spoke to, that's about their holidays. For some people, getting a passport is far more critical. I'd like to just quickly introduce you to Jackie. Thank you very much. You've come here trying to accelerate the process. Explain, what is the passport situation you're in?
OK, well, on the 22nd of April, I tried to extend my daughter's passport for the next 5 years because it runs out in September. She's got a placement from Edinburgh University for an international year in America. Their deadline was the end of April. They've extended it to the 8th, but the appointment I managed to get was the 13th. But now they're needing it by the 2nd. So I've come here today to beg, basically, because I've been on the internet day and night trying to move the appointment forwards. This last week, the service has got worse than ever and is just shutting down, even at 4 o'clock in the morning when I go on the site. And I can't move my 13th of May appointment forward. So I've come here today to basically beg if they can do anything. There is nothing they can do, even if somebody has died in the family. It's been explained to me it's a 1 to 2 week process to be able to fast track them. There is no humanity in the system at all, completely overloaded.
And the reality is your daughter won't be able to do that year abroad in the US if she doesn't get that passport application in time. Jackie, thank you very much for explaining to us. Jackie isn't alone of the number of people who've given up online and tried to come here in person. But as you've just heard, well, Jackie's words were there's no humanity in the system. It is really difficult. And of course, in some cases, this isn't about getting on to the beach. It's about study. It's about travelling to see family members. Lots of people frustrated asking the passport office, and I asked them this as well, why didn't you anticipate this? They say the quickest, easiest way to do it, it's going to take 10 weeks, do it online.
Rosie, thank you very much. And sorry for the little delay we had there. Words that perhaps the passport office should be saying. You're with GB News on TV and DAB radio. Coming up after the break, the European Union's cunning plan for a joined-up defence policy and its own army. But what does it mean for us? Now, though, it's time for a check on the news headlines.
Thanks, Alex. It's 2:34. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. A mother addicted to heroin has been jailed for 20 years for the gross negligence manslaughter of her 7-year-old son. Hakeem Hussein, who was asthmatic, died after Laura Heath used his inhalers to smoke crack cocaine. His body was found in a garden in Birmingham in 2017. A man has been remanded in custody after appearing in court charged with the murders of 4 people in southeast London. Joshua Jacques is accused of killing 3 generations of the same family. 64-year-old NHS worker Dolette Hill and her 59-year-old partner Denton Burke were stabbed in their home in Bermondsey on Monday. Her daughter Tanisha Foria-Kufo and granddaughter Samantha Drummonds were also attacked. Conservative MP Jamie Wallace has been charged with failing to stop and driving without due care after a car crash in November last year. Wallace recently came out as trans and revealed in a personal statement that he was raped and blackmailed. The MP is due to appear before Cardiff Magistrates Court next month. Sir Keir Starmer says the Conservative Party should take action now against the MP accused of watching porn in the Commons. The Labour leader's call follows the launch of an investigation by the government chief whip. Allegations about the unnamed member were first raised during a meeting of Tory MPs. The government says post-Brexit import controls on European Union goods won't be imposed this year to ease the cost of living crisis. Traders are expected to save at least £1 million with the new approach. The announcement comes as Boris Johnson met with Swiss President Ignacio Cassis to work on a new trade deal. TV online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. Stay with us. We need to talk about with Alex is back in just a moment. Don't go anywhere.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's 2 questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. Now, Pesco. You probably haven't heard of it, but like most EU cunning plans, that's probably quite deliberate. It's short for Permanent Structured Cooperation, or in layman's terms, Brussels' grand plan to have a joined-up defence policy and its own army. Something the re-elected French President Emmanuel Macron is keen to crack on with. But also, like most EU power grabs, despite major unanswered questions and evident dangers, the powers that be want to ram it through anyway. The heel-dragging and deliberate obstruction of other countries in arming Ukraine by Germany surely illustrates that Brussels usurping foreign policy from member states is a dreadful idea, something that many in the intelligence services agree with. Here's ex-MI6 boss Sir Richard Dearlove on exactly that.
One of the reasons why I was so opposed to Theresa May's withdrawal agreement, because the defence arrangements in it were very much to link us in to these European initiatives, which frankly are a complete waste of time. And I mean, the truth about our defence policy, defence and security policy, when we were EU members, was to make damn sure that the European Commission had no role in areas of national security and national defence, and we were very successful in keeping it out of their hands. And I think that's the way it should remain, and we are now seeing a fantastic revival of NATO.
Well, the EU loves a good crisis to make its move and is ironically holding up the war in Ukraine as a reason for forging ahead with Pesco, despite some countries pushing back. Denmark is due to have a referendum on the matter, having historic opt-outs on justice and foreign affairs. But what would an EU defence pact mean for Britain? What happens to France's nuclear weapons? How on earth would Europe-wide defence even work? And does it spell the end of NATO? Vital questions that need urgent answers before it's too late. Well, joining us now from Denmark is Susanna Dyer Greenside, who's chair of the People's Movement Against the EU. Susanna, what are your thoughts on EU defence policy?
Good to see you, Alex. Well, here in Denmark, at least from the opposition side, we are very, very, very skeptical of EU defence policy. As you said, if anyone's been a European frontrunner in supporting Ukraine, it's been Great Britain. The EU's defence policy does nothing to, for example, protect us from Russia. In fact, at the end of the day, currently, it's mostly just a waste of time. We've even had our foreign defence minister say as much here in Denmark. They're forging ahead with a lot of new plans, though, and that's what makes me even more nervous, because one thing is wasting time. Another thing is if they forge ahead with something even more dangerous. And I think the plans that we're seeing from Brussels right now are very alarming. The new strategic compass, for example, basically coming up with a precursor to a European army. That's not something Denmark should join. So I'm very glad we have our defense opt-out, and we're fighting very hard to keep it.
Yeah, I mean, you've been bounced into having a referendum in Denmark on this, haven't you? How's that campaign going?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like you say, it kind of came out of the blue. The reason we're holding it, according to our prime minister, is because of the war in Ukraine. But of course, our defense opt-out has absolutely nothing to do with the war in Ukraine, but is kind of being used as an excuse. So we had this very sudden surprise referendum to defend this opt-out that we've had since 1993. It's going well so far in that the no side is growing steadily week by week. But we are fighting a lot of misinformation, a lot of project fear from the other side.
What sort of messaging is being put out from the other side about why defence policy is a good idea and why Denmark should be part of it?
Well, one of the main messages that the yes side is using, that's the people who want to drop the defence opt-out, is that we need to stand together in Europe in order to be against Putin. It's this kind of cooperation, European solidarity against Putin. And so, of course, we're fighting from the no side to try to bring back the facts into the discussion and saying that the EU defense cooperation really has nothing to do with being against Putin. Of course, we're against this horrible war in Ukraine. It has to do with how our defense policy is structured and ultimately who's in control of it. Is it elected politicians or is it the European Union?
And what do you see as the biggest dangers of conjoined defence policy? Is it the fact that it might perhaps prevent individual countries being able to act autonomously, that it might drag down quick decision-making, or is there something more pernicious than that?
Well, one thing is absolutely that it'll drag down quick decision-making. The EU is known for reacting very slowly. As a small country, one thing we're worried about in Denmark is being pressured to join military operations that we don't necessarily agree with, because larger countries will be pressuring us to do so. There's also the question of wasting a lot of money. This is going to be very expensive, and obviously, if we're spending money on having some soldiers standing ready for an EU battle group, those same soldiers aren't being deployed in a NATO mission. We can't spend our money twice. So we're also worried about the economic aspects of it.
Susanna Dag Greenside, Chair of the People's Movement Against the EU in Denmark, thank you so much for joining me. Well, joining us now is former Senior Military Intelligence Officer Philip Ingram. Now, Philip, you have very close connections to NATO, and there are people out there who are saying, well, how do these two things sit side by side? Would the EU forging its own defence pact and having its own army actually undermine or even threaten NATO?
I don't think so at all. There's always been an agreement, a working agreement between the EU and NATO, where NATO has got a military command structure and is designed to enable military operations and pull 21 of the 27 members of the EU are members of NATO, and NATO is 30 countries strong. So there's a big EU presence there. And there's always been an ability to run an EU operation under the Deputy Supreme Commander, who's always a British officer, and do that as a European-wide operation. But NATO is a coalition of the willing when it comes to operations. The EU is a coalition of indecision when it comes to doing anything. Therefore, from a military perspective, when it comes to operations on the ground, it's a non-entity.
So as you say, it would be a non-entity. Do you think then there's no problem with the EU pushing ahead with these plans, or do you think they should put these plans on ice? And, you know, it's the way that the Ukraine war has played out and the reaction of countries like Germany set off any alarm bells about the idea of Brussels usurping, or at least trying to get involved in, national competences when it comes to foreign policy?
Well, I think Ukraine has set off a number of alarm bells, and it's important that they're examined. Let's look at what Pesco does at the moment, where it adds value to both NATO and the EU and everything else. It brings in a standardization for all EU members. And remember, not all EU members are members of NATO. NATO brings in standardization. And a simple way of explaining this is if you travel around Europe, you have to take your multi-adapter for your plug to be able to put it into the socket in the walls in different countries. What NATO and EU under Pesco can do is put a standardization. So if you've got a military piece of kit, you've got the same plug that works in every other military piece of kit. And that is a huge benefit when it comes to integrating weapon systems and everything else together. But we've seen the EU have real difficulties where the German government didn't allow certain vehicles, and I can't remember whether it was from the Dutch or the Belgians, to be sent to Ukraine because the original export license didn't allow them to be used outside purely national for purely national reasons, and didn't allow them to be exported elsewhere. And this is where the real difficulties come in. Politically, France and Germany have always been trying to get this EU army, and it's joint formations together, and some of them exist already, but that is a harping back to the Second World War, where it's trying to stop Germany and France from fighting each other, and the debate's reopened again, and it's important that that debate happens.
Yeah, Philip Ingram, I couldn't agree more. Former Senior Military Intelligence Officer. Well, let's get the thoughts of my studio guest, Gina Miller, leader of the True and Fair Party. I mean, obviously I was a Brexiteer, and I always think that the EU tends to sort of go for a little gap in the market, and then before you know it, they've ramroded through a whole load of things off the back of it in a big power grab, and I'm naturally averse to the idea of Pesco. But where do you stand on this? Philip Ingram seems a lot more sanguine about it and actually thinks that it could bring some good things. You've got the Danes there raising their concerns. Do you have a particular skin in this game or position?
I do, and oddly enough, I try to keep up with these things. And the idea of an EU army is a complete and utter myth. It's nowhere in Pesco. It's nowhere in any of the agreements. Pesco is 25 members of the 27 who are in there. They're joint projects. There are 46 existing projects. Last November, they voted for 14 more. They're projects that look at strategic alliances. About the ones last year were about air and space and what we do about cyber attacks. It is nowhere, anywhere about an army. I don't know where this myth started, but it is a myth. And when it comes to NATO, I think it's really important. I would say that Pesco, actually, the agreement that they made, and also NATO last year in July, did their 2030 reform plan. Both of these forward-looking agendas were before the Ukrainian war. And I'd say that both of them need to be revisited because of what's happened in the Ukraine. And NATO, I think, has to look at itself as NATO members and say, are we too reliant on the US? Because actually the US is controlling NATO. And I think that's something that everyone needs to worry about. And I think when it comes to the EU, I think it's really important that we do have joined-up thinking. But because the bigger geopolitical plates are shifting, you know, look, it's not just about Ukraine, it's what's happening with Russia and Pakistan, what's happening in India, who stayed far too quiet for far too long with the invasion of Ukraine. So I think we have to look at how these pacts work for the future. But I will say once again, there is no such thing as an EU army.
Not yet, Gina.
There's no such thing.
Now, as a child of the 90s, I happen to think that the decade was the peak of Western civilization. We basked in the prosperity of the post-Thatcher boom and all rubbed along together quite nicely. Imagine if the Spice Girls were formed today. You'd have BLM Spice, Trans Spice, Woke Spice, Climate Spice, and change their identity every concert Spice. And they'd win a Grammy for their joint self-harm videos on TikTok following multiple cosmetic surgeries to look like Caitlyn Jenner. Welcome to 2022. It must be time for the Alex Agenda. I bet you thought that grim family sex show due to take place at the Theatre Royal in Bath was thankfully shut down after a petition over evidence safeguarding issues. Think again. The live performance for children 5 and up, which encourages them to mould genitals out of Play-Doh and sing songs about touching themselves and pegging while featuring full nudity on stage, is somehow going ahead on the basis of it being for private audiences only, rather than public ones. Do you get the distinction? Because I don't. They also refuse to say whether minors will be part of the audience, suggesting parents who should probably be referred to social services can still drag their innocent youngsters along to a night of child abuse. It strikes me that there are no circumstances under which toddlers should see todgers or be told about the sort of videos some MPs watch in the Commons. Well, I'm joined now by Tanya Carter, a spokeswoman for the Safe Schools Alliance, a national campaign of parents, teachers, governors and other professionals working to uphold safeguarding. Tanya, are you horrified that this thing is still going ahead despite lots and lots of people signing a petition saying under no circumstances should it happen?
Oh, absolutely. We're incredibly concerned that obviously Sonia Poulton is trying to find out whether at these so-called private showings, if there will be children in attendance. And everyone is refusing to answer her and saying it's none of her business. Well, child safeguarding is the business of every single responsible adult. And we do need to know if any child is being subjected to this, because there are some things their parents can't consent to. We recognise 4 categories of abuse in this country. That's physical, emotional, sexual and neglect. And there is certainly some evidence to suggest that what is going on in this show could be sexual abuse of children. So, of course, it's of public interest. Are children being taken to this show, and are the children that need to be safeguarded?
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Tanya Carter, keep up the good work, spokeswoman for Safe Schools Alliance. Now, I remember my days at Durham University, where toffs called Tarquin wandered around cobbled streets wearing togas made out of bed sheets, snorting snuff and hosting game parties after weekend shooting trips. The first 15 had a range of grotesque initiation ceremonies, and the one dodgy nightclub, Clute, played host to all sorts of unsavoury shenanigans, especially on Wednesday sports night. One thing it definitely wasn't was woke. Well, now students are being subjected to anti-racism training, while one college head was suspended after inviting Rod Liddle to talk to students. How scary. My alma mater is now repeatedly subjected to baying mobs of placard-waving student snowflakes, probably like most campuses up and down the country. I think it's time ex-grads Tom Harwood and I got the train to visit Darren Grimes and taught the new brigade a thing or two about free speech. Now, I was just starting to get on board with Prince Charles as our future king. That is, until I read today he is excited about putting masks on cows. That's right, moo muzzles, let's call them. The idea is that making bovines look like Hannibal Lecter by attaching catalytic converters to their heads, that the methane released when they burp can be captured to help stop climate change. The silence of the cows. What utter madness. As a non-beef eater, I'd simply extol not chowing down these gentle beasts, starting with forcibly closing McDonald's, which is also the blight of the world's waistline. I also question whether it's ethical putting contraptions on the poor creatures, let alone how much it would cost. I'm just waiting now for the follow-up to the moo muzzle, some kind of giant filtration plug that few farmers would be inclined to install. And while I tuck into my 387th brew of the day, I am happy to inform you tea has been scientifically proven to be a wonder drug. Magical properties called flavonoids in the Great British Brew can cut the risk of heart attack and stroke, help prevent cancers and dementia, and enable us all to live longer. Probably explains why I still get ID'd buying wine when I'm circling 40. And what better than enjoying your cup of Kenyan than in a glorious GB News mug? Put the kettle on, love. Right, well, let's go back to my studio guest, Gina Miller, to digest all of that.
Oh, my gosh, what an array of stories.
Where do you want to begin?
Well, the tea, actually, I absolutely agree, because it's a leaf, and there's an awful lot. I don't like too many medicines and things. I think there are lots of natural alternatives. And yes, we should drink tea. I think it's really good for us. And actually, not just normal tea leaves, but fennel leaves and hibiscus and whatever it is you want to put in your hot water. It's good for you.
Well, there you go. After the programme, I'll join you in a cuppa and we'll stay youthful forever. Gina, it's been delightful having you on as my guest. I've really enjoyed your company and your views, so do please come back. That's all I've got time for. Join me again for We Need to Talk About on GB News at the same time, 2 o'clock tomorrow. Coming up next, it's The Briefing with Darren McCaffrey. But first of all, it's time for a look at the weather forecast. Bye-bye from me.
Hello, Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update. Another dry day for the vast majority today. Not particularly sunny. There is quite a lot of cloud around, but many places bright and fine. The thickest cloud across eastern England and northern Scotland. High pressure is sitting right across the UK and will bring the vast majority another dry day. But the cloud is thick in places, particularly over northern Scotland, where we could just have 1 or 2 showers. And it's quite a grey day for much of Yorkshire down into the Midlands and East Anglia. It'll take a while before that cloud starts to break up. Elsewhere, we've got quite a lot of cloud, but there's still some brightness coming through, some hazy sunshine for Wales, southern parts of England, the far north of England, southern Scotland. And if we do get some brightness, temperatures 15, 16, maybe 17, possibly 18 across the south, but feeling quite cold where that cloud persists over eastern England and northern Scotland. Still 1 or 2 showers to come across the Northern Isles through this evening, but they should tend to fade. And for most, it's going to be a dry night, a very small chance of a shower across the southeast. Clear skies for many, and temperatures will again be dropping well down into single figures. In rural spots over Northern Ireland, Northern England, again, we could be a couple of degrees below freezing to start Friday. So another chilly start and another fairly cloudy day over parts of eastern England, Lincolnshire and East Anglia in particular, but also across the southeast. Elsewhere, again, many places looking dry and bright with perhaps a bit more sunshine, but the cloud thickening up at times during the day over eastern Scotland, and we could just see 1 or 2 showers here during tomorrow. Again, temperatures responding to a bit of sunshine up to the mid or even high teens in places, feeling fairly pleasant after a chilly start. But again, parts of the east coast, especially where it stays glum, will be on the fresh side, to say the least. And temperature dropping away on Friday night, leading to a chilly start to the weekend. Bank holiday weekend as well. There will be some rain working into Scotland and Northern Ireland on Saturday. A few more showers around on Sunday, and generally staying on the cool side.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.